I think this idea of using brain activity for sort of real-time brain activity for sound or for art, I've had that question or those suggestions for a long time, since the beginning that I got involved in artistic performances and practices, since I met Per.
The work that we do together and the work with the EEG Center started in 2014, when we, all three of us, Jean-Louis, Stephen and I, were in Brazil, and we wanted to try this, to use EEG to make music. I know Jean-Louis since we were about 15 or 16 or something like that, and I remember when around that time, so we're probably like 17, 18 or something like that, and he made a dream machine, and we were in his old flat in Gothenburg, trying it out. And that's one of the sort of earliest memories I have of sort of hanging at Jean-Louis' flat. The dream machine, I think, was developed by
Burroughs' friend and collaborator Brian Gazin invents the dream machine with the mathematician Ian Somerville in the 60s, in 1960 actually, to be accurate, after having lived a transcendental experience 2 years before. So the experience, you may know it, but I will tell it again for those who don't. He was in a bus traveling, I think in the south of France, and he was, his eyes were closed, and he had the light going through the trees on the route, and so he went into a state of ecstasy, some sort of, but also like very deep meditation. So he tried to retrieve this, to reenact this kind of state with the help of this mathematician Somerville, and they found out. So the machine is based on the light impulsion flickering effect, because he has this flickering effect, and this turned him in.
Basically what you have is you have two lamps, and you have cutouts that are circular that move. So the one Jean-Louis had, it was on two vinyl players, and it's turning very slowly, and what you do is you have your eye, I can't remember whether your eyes are supposed to be open or shut, but you look at the light without focusing on it, and it's supposed to give a hypnotic or hallucinogenic or drug effect.
The cylinder is placed on a record turntable. The rotation is of 78 or 45 RPM. A light bulb is suspended in the center, and the rotation speed allows the light to come out from the holes at a constant frequency of between 8 and 13 pulses per second. This frequency range corresponds to alpha brain activity. So that's important because it's also why we are here. We are all like working, talking about EEG, not ENG, on alpha waves.
participate to an event called Transformation in Stockholm in April 2019. And I think that's when I discovered, or even not discovered, but get really involved in what we call brainwave music.
Well, I think that Brainwave Music is an album by David Rosenboom from 1975.
First of all, if you look at the ocean, you look at the water, you look at the sea, you see the waves, and you ask the question, where do the waves go? How do you answer that question? Because you know that the waves are not traveling, right? You think they're traveling, but it's just because of the movement of the water going up and down. So the water is just going up and down, it's not going left and right, at least the waves. And the same goes with the alpha that we measure, it's these neurons that are firing in this sequence, or they fire and they stop firing, they're firing and they stop firing. This is also why I find this whole, as far as I know, most neuroscientists won't talk about brain waves. This whole idea, and then, to me, every time it's a little bit of when people talk about brain waves, it's oscillations or activity or whatever, brain waves, no.
And I think it was Simons who came up with the term to describe what we've been doing and the technology that we've been developing. So it's basically brainwave music is if you make music while you record your EEG.
Scientists, artists and musicians were here all together to share experiences and researches on neuroscience and music. They were all invited by 1 + 1 = 3, which is formed by Per Hüttner, Stephen Whitmarsh, Samantha Kashi, Jean-Louis Houta and Robert Ostenveld. All together they developed a system that they called EEG synth.
This is Barry now. Keep your eyes half closed. That's called Hangan in Japanese. Buddhist meditative method. Relax. Be vacant. Leave yourself. You don't stop to disturb. And also, you can enjoy a BPM machine by connecting other music instruments as an effect pedal.
So EEG stands for electroencephalography. So it's a measure of electrical activity from the brain and measured from the scalp typically. Although you can talk about intracranial EEG when you place electrodes in the brain. Right, we're dealing with non-invasive surface EEG. So we place electrodes on the scalp and we measure electrical current that's between those points. Between one point and every other point, because we're measuring electron flows, and these are the result of many brain cells firing at the same time, and they fire to communicate. So their way of communicating between themselves is via electrical pulses, and if those electrical pulses they all line up in time and in orientation, then we can start to pick them up. So we need tens of thousands of brain cells all firing pretty much at the same time in the same direction.
Whether we're asleep, as long as we're alive, neurons are firing, and we have whatever it is, 80 billion of them. So they give a very, very slight electricity, and you can measure that outside on your head by putting electrodes.
How we extract these oscillations from the sort of very noisy signal that we measure from the brain, we analyze and we extract the basic elements from the brain signal to say like, okay, we have a little bit more here, a little bit more there, this cognitive function modulates this brain frequency, this cognitive function modulates this frequency. We have to kind of isolate all of that from the noise, from the complex signal. And with sound synthesis we do the opposite. We start with very simple basic wave shapes and we combine them into something which is more interesting, more complex, more melodic perhaps, has more information. And so it's analysis on the one hand and then synthesis on the other hand. So there's this huge overlap between the two. And EEG synth is sort of the interface between the two.
What you will see is Per controlling his brainwaves. He's already trying to get into a meditative state, and we're recording the EEG on the back of his head, which is very sensitive to concentration. That EEG is sent wirelessly to the computer where it's being converted into a control signal that goes into the analog synthesizer, into the modular synthesizer. Furthermore, we're going to use the EEG to control the mixing of three different videos that are shown here on screen. And I should say that the videos are very similar, so it's a very subtle mixing. So don't expect large stroboscopic effects, it's a very subtle effect that you're going to see. And what you also might see is the small ring in front of Per, which is a little bit of feedback to give to Per, so that he knows whether he's modulating his alpha, his occipital range signals up and down. So that's more or less it, what I have to say. We're going to start, it's going to take about half an hour, and after that time there will be an opportunity for you to ask us questions. So enjoy.
We tend to measure the oldest, which are called alpha waves. So they're called alpha, beta, gamma, theta. But it has nothing to do with their. It's not amplitude. It's about their hertz. They're about 10 hertz, and they were the first that were discovered, I think, in the late 19th century.
There are definitely different frequency bands that seem to have different relationship to cognition and to brain activity. Like we have, for instance, delta in deep sleep. We have theta, which has a lot to do with memory, for instance. We have alpha, which has to do with attention. We have beta, which is more related to the motor system. We have gamma, which is we should consider something different.
I mean, nobody really knows what it is. That's part of the fun with doing this, that nobody really knows, and it probably does a lot of different things, because 80 billion neurons firing from time to time is an incredibly complex structure. But what you can very easily see is that if you close your eyes, for instance, your alpha goes up immediately. So it's something that is connected to relaxation. That's we can establish, but it doesn't mean that we know what they do. They're a side effect of our brain doing whatever it is that our brains are doing.
So these are the spots where I'm going to place the reference and grounds. It's a good place because there are no muscles underneath. So it's a clean, sort of clean recording, not too far away from your brain. And so we're going to measure the electrical current between those spots and spots on your scalp.
Yeah.
So I'll start by attaching these. And just use some gel for the connectivity between the electrodes in your skin. And then you have the same as me. You have some less hair here.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna place the electrodes there.
Shit happens.
Yeah. So I just placed 2 for good order, but I'm only gonna use the first. It's connected. So whether or not I have to change 1 or 2 parameters depends on how good the signal is, and how good the signal is I can only know if you relax and close your eyes. And so maybe just for now do a little bit more to the front. Good start. Go.
I just saw some stars.
Yeah. Good. It does reflect a patch of brain, if you measure alpha, a patch of the brain which is sort of inhibited, or at least in a state where it's not so excitable. So it becomes relaxed, the part of the brain is literally relaxed, if you like. And that happens when simply closing your eyes, for instance, where there's no visual input, it doesn't excite the visual cortex, and as long as you don't do a lot of imagination, or you just focus on your body instead, that part of the brain is in a way not really working hard, and so it starts to go into its natural sort of relaxation state, which starts, and during that is reflected by these alpha activity that start to arise.
Alpha waves are also called Berger's waves because they were the first brainwaves discovered in the end of the 19th century by the neuroscientist Hans Berger. They were easier to detect because of their amplitude. But the history of neuroscience is really ancient. We can find sources in ancient Egypt, but it has been really developed during the 17th century, especially by scientists like André Vesal or Costanzo Varolio, who were contemporary to Leonardo da Vinci. He was also a scientist, and even if it's not the most well-known part of his work, he was interested by neuroscience, and he made some sketches of the skull where he compared the brain to an onion, indicating that the brain has a layered structure. So that's why I was really interested by Daniel Brun's conferences in Stockholm.
Hi, my name is Daniel Brun, and I'm the author of the book The Da Vinci Coding of Brainwave Music. And in it I put forward the thesis that the real inventor of brainwave music is actually Leonardo da Vinci. And to support that claim, I've been analyzing a lot of his artwork, and in them you can really see that that is the case. And I'm going to show you a few examples on my pad. Right here you can see the old sketch from Da Vinci, the Vitruvian Man. But what we're actually seeing is him making a sketch of how you create brainwaves. Because when you flap your arms and your legs around, which are in essence controlled by the brain, you create brainwaves. in the air, and that's symbolized by the circle and also the square. And when you do this, you send out these waves, and that equals a loop. And now for this, we can see the Last Supper, the famous painting. And of course, you have Jesus and his disciples, his gang, but it's actually his band. And to prove this, you can see the bread rolls that are laid out on the table. Usually when you paint bread rolls, you just put them all on a straight line. But now, why are they in the different parts of it? Maybe if you superimpose some sheet music on the locations of the bread, you get this. The perfectly good song that was invented by Da Vinci with the bread rolls.
Has some interesting features.
Yeah, but I can get processing people to fix this up.
Yes. So let's look at the EMG thingy.
Oh.
So this is like a sliding time window RMS.
Nice. Yeah. So what's the sampling rate here? But the noise, it's quite good.
Actually, what we should do is we can just put some like a 50 Hz not filter.
Okay.
Let's not do any. So they have a few filters built in, a few default filters built in. Not ones which are really suited for EMG. Interesting to see how you're using this software.
And then this is a floating point number, so just
Biofeedback is a new process that's been made possible by advances in technology, by which a person can listen to his own internal physiological processes. And by listening to it, he can learn about it and begin to learn to control some of them that he may not be in control of.
So bio is more like typically more seen as feedback, where we deal with everything below the brain. So heart rate or skin conductance or peristaltic movements, things that you can measure and that for some reason you can literally even control. And so in the beginning, this is all work from Milner. Originally, he's credited of starting this field, and what he was able to show is that function autonomous, what we used to call autonomous functions. So functions that just happen without us having any control over it, even if we want to, actually can be put under control once you create this feedback, this way of measuring it and then giving it back.
How can he learn to control things? How does he know? By the sound that it's something that's out of control?
By practice. For example, if it's necessary for a person to be able to raise or lower his heartbeat or blood pressure, let's say, it's being shown to be possible now to hook up a device to the person so that
Incredible.
Anybody can do it. I used to think only yogas and people in the East could do those things, and we saw it on TV, which is slightly connected with this, was a guy, they just took a sailor and he could lower his blood pressure. It took him 20 minutes to just will it down. And the yoga had been doing all his yoga for years and years, and he could take his down, but within half an hour the sailor could do it. You know, lower his own blood pressure.
It's incredible.
Yeah,
How long
right.
have you been doing research, David?
About 3 years now. And there are people who, of course, preceded me in this too. And so the whole thing is maybe 5 years old, I don't know.
So that's the biofeedback field, and that had a lot of promises, and many people thought that very promising, and it was a big hype. And like every hype, it crashed, and the good stuff was kept. And then we're now in the, I think, second or third wave of neurofeedback, where it's really brain activity, and so there things are just much more complex because you have this, as I said, this interpretive element to it.
The question I will first address now is, are musical emotion universals? We all know, for instance, that lullabies are present in all the culture, and we are all able to recognize, there is a very nice record of the different lullabies recorded everywhere from the world. And we all, even if we don't recognize the voice, we don't know the language, we all recognize that it's baby talking. But this idea has been specifically addressed by a colleague from Leipzig, Tom Fritz, who decided in a sort of provocative way to study a culture that was isolated from the Western culture. It's a tribe from the north of Cameroon, on the left side, the Mafa tribe. And he decided to use music, Western music, and to present to them Western music, and to see if they will recognize the emotional category. And he used something which was really not the best example of musical excerpts, but at least he took this example that has been used in a lot of our study. In fact, I also use them, but even if they are not nice at all, I will show you and I will present you those stimuli. And the participants had to choose the face corresponding to the music. You know, it's a sort of forced choice recognition paradigm, like this. And then you have another example, sort of caricature of musical excerpts. And then the fear. Okay, that's a type of stimuli we use in our experiment to give you an idea. Huh? It's always nice to realize how artificial it is. That's the result that he obtained, and I think it's quite, as I said, it's quite provocative, because in blue you see the Western listeners, in brown you see the Mafa listeners, and you have the recognition rate. And you can see that the Western listeners recognize better than the Mafa listeners the musical excerpts, but all of them were above chance level. So he concluded his article by saying, of course, there are very good evidence that musical emotions are universal.
When we start the performance, immediately I hear the music or the sounds that are generated by my alpha waves. And as Jean-Louis builds up the music, I can also go into a deeper trance. And so it's a kind of a way where the boundaries between me and the music are completely evaporated. And that is a very, very interesting experience.
Hearing being what happens with the ear, and what the ear does. I mean, I'm getting pretty radical in saying I think that that which is called ear training in music schools is really wrong. Mm-hmm. You can't train the ear; it does what it does, right?
Yep. It's a microphone.
It's a microphone. It
it's
does.
A very cool microphone.
It's a very cool microphone. It does what it does. But what can be trained is listening, and that's what the technology is doing. Is changing the way we listen. It can't change the way we hear, but it can. Our listening is the kind. I think that listening is probably very close to what we call consciousness.
So, for instance, one thing that we play with is your attentional state or your state of relaxation. That does have sort of a measurable effect on brain activity.
After a while, I can always go back to kind of, there are usually traces, so I can go back and hear myself, so to speak. But the goal of what we're doing is to, or what I'm doing at least, is to try and let myself go completely. And so then that feedback loop happens the whole time.
To be able to explain, okay, we go from this, from recording of electrical activity from the brain, and certain, for instance, frequency bands relate to maybe certain cognitive functions. And they then control certain parameters of the sound. And those parameters of the sound are then sort of listened to by the person who's being recorded and creating these feedback loops. And then what can be controlled, what can't be controlled. So it becomes really a very cognitive question, or a very something where you can be very creative in just thinking of, okay, what aspects of the sound can I control in an interesting way that would then be able to be controlled by brain activity, etc.
We can learn to a certain degree to how to influence the sound using the alpha waves, but we will never have control. So there's an interesting kind of balance between having control and not having control. So this is, I think, is fundamental, and which is also important in kind of looking, because we tend to think about music, and at least in kind of modernist terms, as you want as much control as possible.
From the author who brought us the non-compelling book How Descartes Invented Thinking comes a new thought-provocative piece of work. In the Da Vinci coding of brainwave music, speller Daniel Brun brings forward the thesis that Leonardo da Vinci is the real inventor of brainwave music. Soon, in a second-hand store near you.
So this is like more or less an idea also what I want to do this weekend.
Yeah.
So we can also have motion and environmental signals. So we could also record sound. We can use video, as Jean-Louis did recently. And so these are not normal to use in a synthesizer. So that's where the EEG synth comes in. And the EEG synth, it's largely software, which runs either on my computer or on Jean-Louis' computer. And the output of the EEG synth goes into the modular synthesizer, which is hardware. And then the modular synthesizer, of course, goes into sound, or we use, like, not the modular, but we control light, or we're controlling video.
Yeah.
And I want to explore these.
Yeah. But I think that what is important is the synchronicity of this, because I think that it's subconsciously, like when you see that there's a synchronicity in the sound output and the visual output, that's when you kind of get that you get the connection between the two. What I'm interested in this project is, of course, artistically, because I'm interested in music and all of that, but conceptually I'm interested in how the inner movements of the body, so whatever happens inside our body is connected to what happened outside. And so it has what we call an emergent relationship, meaning what happens inside is of course affected by what happens outside, but it's also the other way around. What happens inside also affects how you perceive what happens outside. So there's a constant feedback loop between that. And we all know this because we wake up in the morning and we're happy, and then the world meets us with smiles because we're happy, and the more we smile, but if we wake up and we're late and we're pissed off and you hit your foot and you're like, spill the coffee, and it's a little bit like that. We know that the way that we feel inside affects how the world reacts to us.
Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Brianna Head, and I'm a neuroscientologist at the hospital of Sollefteå. And I'm very pleased to be here today to share some of my results from my recent studies about how to communicate emotions through brain waves. So, today we're going to focus on one of my patients, Kyle, who I've been studied since 2014. And some of my results with Kyle are very interesting. Yes. What you see here is an MRI scan of Kyle's brain and how it changes when I communicate my emotions to him through brainwaves. So if I go to the next slide, excuse me, you can see a little bit more on how I conducted these experiments. So in this first picture, you can see how Kyle and also me in the picture are very happy. This is when I communicated the happy feeling for me that he was my patient. And this is what it sounded like.
Click.
He's very happy. And on the second picture, you can see how a sudden emotion of sadness hit me when I realized that Kyle wouldn't be my patient, or we wouldn't have this relationship, this very strictly patient-doctor relationship after the study was done. And it sounded like this.
Click. Oh, why? Why?
Yes. And on the third picture, you can see how this realization turned into anger for me and for Kyle through my brainwaves. And they sounded like this.
Click. Oh, no!
Yes.
It's very, very hard to bring people together from different disciplines. So bringing artists and scientists together is hard. But once you pass a certain threshold, it becomes incredibly rewarding because of that.
And that's why 1 + 1 is 3 was, in my mind, made with a select group of people where we can kind of agree not to emphasize this point all the time, which is so, interdisciplinary art, for instance. I hate the term because it's not about that. It's about this fact that we lose these boundaries, not to emphasize them again and again and again.
People can come from music, they can come from art, they can come from science, they can come from psychology, they can come from very different backgrounds, and they can feel that it's okay. Because nobody understands the whole thing. It's like nobody has an understanding of what's happening, because the musicians will know the music better, the scientists will know the neuroscience better, and so on and so forth. And nobody really understands it. Nobody is like, I'm an authority on this, because it's in between, it's happening in between. And I think that is part why the audience liked it, because they felt like, here it's okay not to know, and it's okay not to be an authority, and it creates a kind of a nice ambience.
And also, since I started getting involved and getting invited in, like in the beginning, these art collectives, you also realize that there's this whole world where you know nothing about, with references you don't know. It's really a way of stepping outside of this bubble. Not necessarily to become the scientist, to bring the scientific opinion, not at all, but just for me to have a broader life and a broader engagement in the world, with and then being able to at one point be on stage. That was also very cool. That is relatively recent, I guess, where I'm actually also there, turning the knobs, being a performer on the synthesizer, developing my own taste, and then having people really, really enjoy it, or some hate it, but some really like it. That's also a very strange, very fun experience. So.
What can happen in a social setting is that you have people who have different fears. So you have the artist on the one hand who all share the fear of not being understood or not being liked for what they're doing. And you have the audience who feel their fear of feeling stupid and not being a part of it. So you have these two kinds of fears, and there are two ways you can go. You can either say that on two sides it's like, no, but I'm going to stick to my side and be kind of arrogant about it, and you will never have a meeting. Or you can say, well, we're all kind of scared here, so let's be scared together, and then it's okay. Then all kinds of interesting exchanges can take place, and I think that's why it's super important to have that. And that's why when you get to a gallery and you get like a press release which is written in a complicated language with references to artists that people don't know, basically what you're saying is, yeah, I should be scared, I'm going to leave, you can have your press release. Rather than saying, what you see, what you hear, what you experience, but it's like, yeah, it's okay, you know, it's like, I'm not sure either. I'm pretty sure that the artist is not sure either, so it's like we're all on the same level here.
I think the fact that we do performances, that it gives much more also to the eyes, and also socially, we are starting to work more and more with the space itself and with the way and how that kind of includes people and how it envelops people. So much more sort of also acoustic questions in a sense, or social acoustic questions, that have just an experience which is very hard to control or very hard to determine, but it's all to do with space and how we're in there together, not the sound it's, you know, by itself.
All artistic performances that has a duration in time puts the audience in different forms of hypnotic states. It can be very, very shallow, but it's, you know, it's like you're reading a book. You put yourself in a hypnotic state.
The most interesting thing typically is what happens after the performance, when you have this interaction with the audience, when you have the questions, when you hear about things they experience, and when they appreciate their enjoyment. And then, you know, it's very good to hear. It's very nice to hear. So there's this very ambiguous thing with the audience, I find. And it's also very important, if you have an audience, to introduce it properly. If you introduce it properly, people can really appreciate it. We've done it sometimes where we had no introduction and only afterwards do we explain what just happened, and we already lost two-thirds of the audience. And then you explain it and they're like, oh wow. But then also you give something away. You direct people's attentions to, for instance, the technology, which I think is the worst thing we should do.
But it's also about individuality. I mean, I think this is the problem with the kind of Kantian dualistic way of looking at the world, where it's like right and wrong, this and that. You know, it's like it becomes incredibly limiting, and it also diminishes so much of the potential that each individual person has. So, I mean, I don't know what connections you need to do in the world, or, you know, I get it, you know, I have a student in front of me who's like 17 who wants to become a painter, a filmmaker, I don't know what kind of connections that person wants to make, because it's through the connections that they make between things in the world will define who they become as human beings. But if I, as a teacher, say, this is the way you do it, this is how it should be done, I eliminate virtually all the potential, and it kills creativity, and it's incredibly bad for everyone, I think.
I think one thing that I was thinking of is this idea of experimental music, because I think that is maybe one way of at least delineating a little bit what we're doing. A little bit better is that it's really experimental versus anything else. You know, it's not pop music. And I'm fascinated with experimental music because of the ideas that are behind it, and then the sound that comes out, or the music, which is then, you know, there's no textbook of how to listen to it even. You have to learn how to listen to it, and it's hugely challenging. And I have I've had a hard time trying to get there, and now I'm at the point where I enjoy, I guess, much more this sort of ambiguity in sound, and just taking it as sound, you know, just taking it as an experience.
And I think that's also why it's very important, these experiences of going into your body, because it can be pretty scary. But once you learn that, okay, well, actually, this is my body, this is who I am, and I mean, all these exercises are about overcoming fear. I mean, that's not why I started doing yoga, but that's what I've learned. It's like, okay, fear here, fear there, fear this, fear that, and gradually, by doing it on a regular basis, you kind of overcome them. But the fear is there, and it's locked into your body.
That's when and where we started to work on it with the group. We were really interested by this technology, so we needed to learn more. We needed to understand what these brain waves or neural oscillations were used to, or what does it represent. Professor Chris Frith, in his book Making Up the Mind, How the Brain Creates Our Mental World, argues that what we see is not the world as it truly is, but an illusion. Even if all our senses are intact and our brain is functioning normally, we do not have direct access to the physical world. It may feel as if we have direct access, but this is an illusion created by our own brain. It is like the illusion with the ocean waves. We see them moving left or right, but they are just going up and down. They are motivated by a way bigger and complicated set. The world does not divide itself into fact-sized chunks that can be consumed by our senses. Nature does not inherently divide itself into salient pieces, and what is salient or important is only revealed in our relationship within nature. The facts that we can lay claim to about the world are arbitrary insofar as they are selected from an almost infinite number of potential facts. Just imagine, as Descartes did, that we can be liberated from the constraint of the body and exist only as pure soul. No longer bound by space or time, such a being will be free to traverse the universe at will, except that such an undifferentiated and locationless being, no longer tensed in time, will be unable to separate past, present and future, or to separate here from there. With no fixed adobe in time or space, there will be no means by which experience could be determinate, and no features to discriminate the specific from the general. It is precisely the constraint of a body existing in the here and now which enables a specific viewpoint to flourish and an independent existence to enhance itself.
And at last, you can see the relief that I felt that when I realized that this study will be ongoing for several years, and also actually that I wouldn't be needing Kyle forever.
Click. Oh.